Good morning, everyone. My name is Alana Dillon. Actually, good afternoon. I'm an Education and Support Services Coordinator at Parkinson Society, BC. Welcome to our Care Partners series, part 2, featuring a talk on legal considerations plan ahead with Joanne Taylor, Executive Director at Nidus Personal Planning Resource Center. Following her talk today will be Jenn Allen, PSBC's Healthcare Navigator, who will be joining us for her talk on long-term healthcare planning. Before I formally introduce our first speaker, Joanne, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, I want to let you know that we are recording this session, so it will be available on our website. Secondly, you will see a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that icon to open it, feel free to use this chat box during the webinar to make any comments or questions for our speakers today. And Joanne will be reading the questions at the very end of her presentation and then answering. And then finally, to optimize your experience with this webinar, please ensure that you adjust your speaker volume both on your computer as well as on your actual speakers so that you can hear the webinar well. It's my pleasure to now introduce Joanne Taylor. Joanne Taylor is the Executive Director of the Nidus Personal Planning Resource Center, formerly Representation Agreement Resource Center, a non-government charitable organization. Joanne is also Registrar of the Personal Planning Registry. As a volunteer, Joanne chaired the Representation Agreement Task Group, the Planning and Policy Group for implementation of the Representation Agreement Act from 1993 to 2000. Since the Representation Agreement Act came into effect in 2000, Joanne has assisted tens of thousands of people, the public and professionals, to learn about representation agreements, enduring powers of attorney, expressing wishes, and other tools related to personal planning. Most recently, Joanne has added information on medical assistance in dying to the Nidus repertoire. Joanne has personally assisted thousands of people to make, register, and use representation agreements. She is also a hands-on resource to community, volunteers, and healthcare providers, mostly in the senior sector, so they can help numerous other individuals and families with personal planning, and particularly representation agreements. Under Joanne's leadership, Nidus is recognized as the expert resource in the education and practice of personal planning and of representation agreements as a legal alternative to adult guardianship. Joanne has presented on representation agreements for a variety of professional groups in BC and for officials of public guardianship services in the United States and Australia. Joanne was a guest speaker at the 4th World Congress on adult guardianship held in Berlin in September 2016. Joanne has a master's degree in adult education and counseling psychology with an emphasis in gerontology. Joanne has knowledge and experience with dementia, hospice, palliative care, and developmental disabilities. Thank you, Joanne, for taking the time out today to join us for this talk. I will pass it over to you now.
Great, thanks, Alana. So as Alana said, use the chat box and you can type in their questions at any time. I'm going to look at those at the end of the presentation, but you can be putting them in there at any point. So I've called this an overview of legal planning documents in BC. So it is about the legal considerations. I called it an overview because there's no way I can pass on everything that I've learned and you couldn't absorb it all. So we're going to kind of do a broad brush, but some people who know more will be asking more detailed questions. So first of all, I'll just tell you a little bit about Nidus. The name Nidus is actually Latin for nest. And we just like that symbolism. When you think of a nest, you think of support and safety. And we like that idea. The Nidus Resource Center, as has been mentioned, is a nonprofit charitable organization. And the Resource Center was set up many years ago, 1995, by seniors and disability groups who had been involved in creating the law for representation agreements. And so the Resource Center was set up to provide information about the new laws. There were actually a few laws that came into effect, but representation agreements really are the foundation. But we have information on enduring powers of attorney and many other topics. We provide forms for making a representation agreement, because that's our area of expertise. And I'll tell you briefly about the Nidus Registry, which is a service that we set up to where people can securely store important information and copies of documents. So it doesn't have to be a document you made through the Nidus Resource Center, but any kind of document or information that you want to store online and then make it available to others. So first of all, I want to just, I call it setting the scene as a way to kind of get into our topic. So in the past, and still somewhat today, there's been an emphasis on, oh, what's going to happen when I die? Like, who's going to get what? And I have to make decisions about that. But with the aging of the population, and really that's, was a big driver for the law reform, we want to be putting our emphasis on, well, what if something happens while I'm alive? And I think COVID-19 kind of promoted this a little bit, right? Because people started thinking about, oh my goodness, what if I go into the hospital? Who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to talk to the medical team if I'm not able to, I'm unconscious, I'm on a breathing machine, whatever. So that's what we use the term personal planning to talk about legal documents you can make for while you're alive, but you might need help with decisions. The health system uses the term advanced care planning because they want to encourage us to think about and talk about healthcare. We like the term personal planning because it's, for us, it's broader because things are interrelated. And so this chart shows you 4 life areas: health, personal, legal, and financial. And there are, laws and policies related to each of these life areas. There's some similarities and some differences. So for example, there's even institutions like a hospital whose reason for being is healthcare. A bank or credit union, their reason for being is financial. So there's going to be laws and policies related to those areas that are specific to those areas. And I've also noted that 19 is the age of adulthood in BC. There's a lot of confusion about that, and the legislation is also provincial. Like if you're in Ontario, the age of adulthood is 18, and they have different laws for these life areas. So that's part of being in Confederation. But it's good to kind of know some of those basic things. And so in BC, when someone turns 19, no one has automatic legal authority to act on their behalf. Parental or, guardianship of children, those rights end when somebody reaches adulthood. So there's 2 responses. Like, an adult can be proactive by making a legal document, and so that's what we're going to talk about. And so that's a way to give somebody legal authority in case the adult's mental capability is questioned and they need some help making decisions about their finances or about their health care, or about legal matters, etc. If people aren't proactive, so this applies to all of us, then authority is imposed on the adult. I just wanted a way to distinguish that. Now, sometimes people need help being proactive, but those are the two kind of routes or ways that we can handle this. So often people will start with the name of the legal document they heard somewhere. They heard these names. The most common name is power of attorney, but that's really not enough, right? Are we talking about a non-enduring power of attorney or an enduring power of attorney? So I have now saying, don't start with the name of the document. Where we need to start is with the capability requirements. And this is unique to British Columbia. And we're very fortunate in British Columbia that we actually have these what I call paths and definitions of capability. Now, the traditional definition, which has been around for hundreds of years, and goodness knows it's time for a change, but the traditional definition is that a person has to understand the nature and effect of the legal document at the time they're making it. So that's what you want to stop and think about. So probably all of us on this webinar would meet that definition. So you have to make your legal document while you're considered capable of understanding. There is no universal definition, universal test, but you know, so people come up with all kinds of ways to defend that. So the idea is that if you can demonstrate understanding, then you meet this definition. Now, some people don't. So that was what the law reform was all about. And we put a different definition, a new definition of capability into the law, into the Representation Agreement Act under what's called Section 7. Think of the Act as the book. And you turn to Chapter 7. Legal jargon calls it Section 7. So that's what we call it when you're looking at laws, at legislation. So there's a different definition, and it says that people could make an agreement under Section 7, which if you were to flip to that section, to that chapter, you would see that there's sort of 4 authorities. They're called standard powers under Section 7, and people could make an agreement with those authorities that cover aspects of all 4 life areas, right? Even if their capability to understand is in question. We're not sure if they cognitively understand. So that's the you'll see that these definitions relate to the legal tools, because the legal documents or legal tools that you can make have capability requirements that are dependent on these definitions. So what are these legal tools, you say? All right. So if we meet the traditional definition, so most of us, right? All of us probably on this webinar. So for health and personal care matters, the most comprehensive document would be a representation agreement under Section 9. So that's a different chapter, like you flip ahead. And it's called RA9 for short. So I have one of those. Like that's to cover health and personal care. So for legal and financial, you'll see there's an or. Most people would be like me and would make an enduring power of attorney, because that's the most comprehensive legal document to cover legal and financial affairs, if you're on this traditional definition. And then the will, of course, for after I die. But you have to be capable of understanding what a will is. And you have to make it obviously ahead of time before you die. And then that's the legal document that would be used. Now, what if somebody doesn't, their understanding is in question? We can't tell. And so this situation affects, people with a disability from birth, adults who have a disability from birth. We used to call that mental handicap. It affects people with advanced dementia. And the Alzheimer's Society was very much involved in the law reform because they were helping caregivers of people with advanced dementia whose understanding wasn't clear, right? It also might be someone who has a stroke, very serious stroke, and we can't tell just how serious the brain damage is. Maybe they'll recover completely, or maybe they'll still have some problems. But meanwhile, decisions need to be made. Things need to be handled, right? So that's what the representation agreement under Section 7 can do. So it covers, as I said, aspects of all 4 life areas. Covers minor and major health care. So medications, surgery, tests, all kinds of things that would happen under health care. Personal care matters like arranging services and supports, maybe rehab, depending on what the situation is. So maybe just bringing in, if somebody has advanced dementia, maybe a support person, a companion, to give the caregiver a break. It covers legal affairs, like sometimes that's just getting some information from some advice from a lawyer, or it might mean instructing the lawyer to take a case. It might mean representing the adult in small claim court, because the adult can't do that themselves. They need somebody to do it. And then it covers what we call routine financial affairs, which would include the service, dealing with Service Canada or Canada Revenue, as well as the date, the banking, government benefits, actually a lot of things. People often think finances and they think of banking, but actually there's a lot more things, like redirecting the mail, for example, is under financial authority. And sometimes you need to do that. I had to do that when my dad, he had Parkinson, and he did go to a care facility, not because of a health care so much as the personal care. We just couldn't put enough personal care supports in place. And so he went to the care facility, and I needed to redirect his mail. So I can't just show up at Canada Post and say, I'm the good daughter. How do they know? They want to see, well, where's your legal authority to do this? So I have to show the document. So that just is to give you an idea. As I said, we're doing an overview. Now this is a little messy. I'm sorry about that, but people often say, well, what if there isn't anything in place? So I said, there's people can be proactive and get something in place, or it's going to be imposed, because there's always kind of a default, right? So for healthcare, there's something called the temporary substitute decision maker, TSDM. And that is when there's nothing in place, a decision needs to be made about healthcare. The healthcare provider determines the adult cannot make the decision themselves, doesn't understand the risks and benefits of the healthcare being offered. And so the healthcare provider selects somebody to be a TSDM. And notice the first word is temporary. This is not, you're not appointed for life, right? That's what a representation agreement is about. This isn't. And then there's for personal care, I didn't know how to make this really small. If there's nothing in place, there's a role called substitute decision maker. Well, even if there is a representation agreement, they first of all determine the adult's not capable, and then select a substitute decision maker. So this is just for admission to a care facility. It wasn't, these procedures weren't in effect when my dad went to the care facility. They came into effect November 2019. And we have a fact sheet on it. There's another sort of default or imposed authority, and it covers kind of everything for health and personal care. Not common, but it's called a comité of person. So comitéship, strange word, but that's what we call adult guardianship in British Columbia. We call it comitéship. And for health and personal care, it would be somebody would apply to the, you'd hire a lawyer and then apply to the Supreme Court of BC. And a judge would, first of all, decide that the adult in question is incompetent, and then look at who applied. Would they be a good comité of person? So that's the default for health and personal care. For legal financial, it's what we call comité of estate, and it can happen in two ways. The public guardian and trustee, which is a government official, and then they have an office, obviously, and it's called public or statutory guardianship, where they could take over somebody's legal and financial affairs. And that's done through medical assessments. And or somebody could hire a lawyer and go to court, and that's called private guardianship. So if somebody has to go to court for comité of estate and they hire a lawyer, the lawyer is probably going to say, well, why don't we also do comité of person? So it's maybe more common that way, but in the past it hasn't, comité of person hasn't been as common. And then of course there's a default scheme if people don't have a will. And someone becomes the administrator, often a family member who's willing to do it. And they have the same duties as an executor, because if you make a will, you name somebody to be an executor. If you don't have a will, then somebody has to kind of be voted in to be the administrator. And the default scheme, only certain people can inherit. So it doesn't include charities, even if the person, without the will really would have wanted to give some money to a charity. that's not on the default scheme. That's not on the list. Okay, so you can see why I was, pushing the planning side, and with the RA7, I mean, that's a lot of people will be hopefully planning ahead and making the RA9 or the enduring power of attorney and the enduring power of attorney, sorry. But if someone's capability to understand is in question, they're not left out. They were in the past, but thanks to the RA7, they're not. So really, there's no excuse not to plan, is kind of my underlying message. Why do people do this? Because it's proactive as opposed to reactive. It provides certainty and continuity. Makes things easier on others, less burden, cost, and effort for a spouse or family and friends. And it avoids involvement of the system, because you could see that, the health system has to work harder if they have to select a temporary substitute decision maker. The court system or the legal system, it costs more money and time if they have to be involved. And of course, who pays for that? Well, taxpayers pay for some of that, which is us. Now, so those are the legal documents. And then I just briefly wanted to talk to you about, if people go to the trouble of making their documents, then, how do we find them? And so that comes down to communication, and that's where the idea of the Nidus Registry came from. It came out of that grassroots law reform, the idea of it. Because, and honestly, I'm trying to encourage people, and I think the health system is trying to encourage people to plan ahead of time. But people forget where these are. And I get lots and lots of emails from people saying, I don't know if my mom or dad did anything. Like, I don't know. And I don't know who to ask. I don't know where to look. So it's a real problem. So the Nidus Registry can help with that long-term thing. And I already told you that it's a service to securely store information and documents, and you can arrange access for future needs. Registration is not required by law, but it has many benefits. And it's operated by the Resource Center. So the first thing is to create a Nidus Registry account, and the Nidus Registry has its own website. It's separate from the Resource Center, has its own website, and you sign up, and then once you've signed up and you have your login, we call it Nidus ID, and you make up a password, then you can log in and keep your registrations up to date. Sometimes people just want to look at it. So where do you get information? I told you that the Resource Center has lots of information. The Resource Center website is pretty easy. You could even just type in nidus.ca. The www isn't needed nowadays, but a lot of us are used to doing that. And then you'll click information in the top menu bar, and a whole bunch of topics will drop down. And if you're looking for the representation agreement forms, there's two places. Again, nidus.ca, you're at the Resource Center website, and on the home page, if you scroll down, it says looking for RA forms, click get started, and it'll take you to where they are. Or in the right sidebar under highlights, it says RA forms, and that's a link, and you can click it. So now I'm just going to check on questions. So somebody has asked, would someone have both an RA9 and an RA7? Well, that's a little, there's some detail to answer. So here's my answer. They might have an RA9 as the most comprehensive for health and personal care. They meet the capability requirements. And with that, and when you get a chance to look at the chart again, they might have an RA7, what we call an RA7 FNL. So the RA7 only has routine financial authority and authority for legal affairs. So that's because the RA9 is covering the health and personal care. We don't want to have overlap. It causes confusion and it could even cause conflict. So another question, is there a cost to using the Nidus registry? The only cost for the registry is to register. And it's $25 for the first document. And that's not an annual fee. That's a one-time fee. And then $10 for additional documents. There's no cost to update your information, to print wallet cards, to share your registrations, to view them, to print them, just to register. Any other questions? Because that was a lot of information. But hopefully you can go to the website and then you can't hurt anything by clicking on the links. So, so there's another question. Can anyone access the Nidus registry? No. I mean, we tell people do not give your password to anybody else. You could share documents, share your registrations with them, and they have their own login, so that keeps it private. We can authorize others to view, so they have to be authorized. So for example, the public guardian and trustee, they have the task, you know, if there's a complaint about abuse, they've got to look into it. So they might access the registry just to see what's available and who's who, and, you know, so they can do their investigation. Or they might, you know, be asked, does this person has, you know, we don't think this person has made any arrangements, so you need to get involved. So they could use the registry to see, well, maybe there is something already arranged, they just don't happen to know about it. But we authorize them, and then when you register, you decide who's allowed to see things, because this is all about consent. And you give consent, we check out that the public guardian trustee, you know, who actually, it's not everybody in that office, it's a certain person who's going to have authority and who's going to abide by the privacy legislation. I'm calling them legal documents. So there's no legal term for notarized. So the question is, are these legal documents needing to be notarized? So people mean different things by the term notarized. Sometimes people mean, you know, does it have to be signed by a lawyer or notary public? A representation agreement does not. A will does not. The enduring power of attorney, if it's going to be used for real estate purposes, which you never know, it's a good idea, yes, to have it signed by a lawyer or notary. Sometimes people use the term notarized to mean certified, and that just means that you know, the photocopy is from an original. And Service Canada does that. You don't have to go to a lawyer or notary and pay fees for that. Financial institutions can do that. Doctors can do that. it's available. So there's a question, is there a wallet card for power of attorney? Well, the wallet card is for whatever you register. So if you register an enduring power of attorney, you can print your wallet card. It'll relate to whatever's registered. I'm not sure what this question means. So the question is, are they only filled out by family members and kept on file to enable the designated family member to act on behalf of the subject person when helping with arranging services? So if you mean the registry, sometimes it makes sense for family member to register the document, but the actual document is made by the adult. You don't do it, it's not done behind their back. That's why it's different from the imposed authority. So there's someone is asking, so if you put things into the registry, but only you can access it, how is this going to help? It's up to you. If you want to be the only person to access, then you will, when it asks you, can these parties access, and you say no, then yeah, then you've set it up so only you can. But of course, the whole idea of the registry is that you can set it up so other people can view it. You can also share your registrations with people you trust so they can see exactly what is registered. They can't edit it or change it, but they can see what you've registered, which is going to be helpful. Better than, looking in the garage and under the bed and, every drawer and wondering where the heck it is. So another question is, what is the difference between a power of attorney and an enduring power of attorney? A non-enduring power of attorney automatically ends if the person who made it becomes mentally incapable. An enduring power of attorney, it'll have some special wording in it, continues to be in effect, even if the person who made it becomes mentally incapable. So you can read about that in going on our website and looking at those topics under information. And there's one called Enduring Power of Attorney, and there's lots and lots of information there. So it'll give you more detail. I think I'm probably at my time, right, Alana?
I think that was the last question. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this informative and very helpful talk, Joanne. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for really good questions, everyone.
Yes. Okay. Bye for now. And
bye now.
All the best.
Sorry about that. I just realized I was on mute. Our next speaker is Jennifer Allen. Jennifer has a master's of social work and 25 years of experience as a clinical social worker in various roles and settings within Vancouver Coastal Health. During this time, she provided assessment, short and long-term counseling services, education, and community resourcing to families and individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds, experiencing challenges with mental and physical health, addictions, and trauma. In addition, she has specialized skills and knowledge about the psychosocial aspects of neurological rehabilitation, particularly traumatic brain injury, concussion, Parkinson's disease, stroke, neuromuscular skeletal disorders, and dementia. As a result, Jennifer has extensive experience helping people with Parkinson's and their care partners work through the many unique difficulties they may face. She has also been an interim counselor for Parkinson's Society BC and has now taken on a new role as PSBC's healthcare navigator. Jennifer, thanks so much for being here with us. I'll pass it over to you now.
And I'm just trying to line myself up, and guess what? It's not working. So I just have to, maybe everybody could just take a bit of a couple minutes while I get myself technologically in place. Okay, so. Sorry, Alana.
Oh, no problem. We can take a pause.
I'm not sure why this isn't working. It's open.
So I'm not sure where you're at, but basically you might already know this, but you want to have the PowerPoint open.
It is. And when I
share a screen, and then
it's not coming up.
And so when you go to advanced,
advanced. Okay.
So when you go to share screen,
yeah,
and do you have basic checked off?
I have basic checked off, and
the PowerPoint is not showing?
No.
And if you go to advanced, is it showing?
No. So can I leave and come back in?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to try that. Sorry.
Perfect. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Jen, you're on mute.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I think I've dealt with the technical difficulties from my end. So thank you for joining me today. And as you know, I'm going to be talking about basically long-term healthcare planning, or as I like to call it, future healthcare planning. And from my background, I've been working in healthcare for many years. And this is a subject that's come up a lot in my work with people. And generally, when they think about this topic, the word I think they would most commonly use to describe it is they're filled with dread when they think about sort of future care planning. And so I'm hoping that with our conversation, or with the information I provide today, that I can at least help you feel a little bit less dread by the end of it, by giving you some, a general sort of concept about the process and some, ideas about how to approach it. So for today's session, there's going to be some basic things I'd like to cover that is part of the process of planning for the future. And the first thing is learning to assess your situation as it is now. So that means really assessing your loved one's care needs and also your own. That's going to be a huge thing I'm going to emphasize is not just your loved one, but your own care needs, because the two go hand in hand. Learning to identify who can help you, knowing what resources are available in the community, in the what systems are available, and how to access those systems, understanding what gets in the way, what are the barriers to future care planning, because there's many. And then hopefully you'll leave with some practical ideas about how to, move forward. So the first thing really is, and just again, it's think of planning as a process, and there's parts of a process. So in order to plan, we need to know what we need now and what our loved one needs now. So when you're thinking about planning, think about it and assessing. You want to assess from all areas of function. So you want to look at the physical issues, the cognitive issues, the social, emotional, and the spiritual issues. Because for each individual, for each of your loved ones, there will be a different set of, what you assess at any given time. And so you start to think of this process of planning as just that. It's a process. It unfolds and it shifts over time. So some examples of what you might consider when you're looking at your loved one's needs. So in terms of the physical, it might be, do they need help with personal care? Can they shower, get dressed, eat? What are they able to carry out activities of daily living? What's their ability to move around? Do they need an aid? That kind of thing. And is tiredness and fatigue something they experience? In terms of assessing cognitive needs, you may be noticing slight cognitive changes or maybe more dramatic changes, which happens with Parkinson's. We tend to focus more on the physical things, but for many people, the changes in thinking skills is really a common thing. You might be noticing memory changes. Maybe they just get distracted easily. They're slower to respond. And maybe they just don't have the same interest in the things that they used to enjoy. And it's hard to get them involved in other interests. In terms of emotional needs, what's their mood like? Do they suffer from depression? Do they get frustrated easily because they can't do the things they used to? Maybe anxiety is a huge component for them, and you notice that they get really easily overwhelmed, just as you do sometimes with providing care for them. But really understanding that these are all components of what happens with Parkinson's disease. In terms of social needs, ability to connect with friends, family, and community. Sometimes it might involve communication challenges. And also for some people, if they're not able to connect, and the pandemic has really shown us this as well, just how much social isolation can impact us. In terms of the spiritual, oftentimes people have different interpretations of what that means. And for many, it has a religious context, but for others, not so much. It's about their sense of purpose, how they derive meaning from living their lives, day-to-day activities, that kind of thing. So you want to be thinking about all different aspects of the person, not just the physical. So what I've included here is a checklist that's actually on the Parkinson's website, which I think is extremely useful. And it's designed to help you when you're going to perhaps visit a physician or some other healthcare provider. But what I like about it is there's a lot of information, but it puts things into categories, and it gets you to think about challenges that your loved one may be having that you maybe didn't consider as part of Parkinson's. So this can be found on the Parkinson's website, and I find this a super useful checklist, particularly if you're going to meet a neurologist. Maybe you're tracking this over time. You can compare, what the issues might be from one time to another. So this is just a little tool for you to use if you think it might be useful. So because of my work history, my background, for me, what's super important when you're looking at future healthcare planning is to look not only at the person with Parkinson's disease, but also the people who are caring for them. You can't really have one without the other. And so part of my process discussion with you today is to really get you to think about, and for some people this is very challenging, is to assess your own needs, not just your partner's needs. And what a lot of caregivers say to me is they say, I'm so tired, I don't have time to go to my exercise class. I really want to be able to exercise and maintain my own health. I want cognitive stimulation. I have things I enjoy. I like to have time to follow my interests. Emotionally, just time to get some sense of calm and relaxation, if at all possible, so that I can reduce my level of stress, and then I can manage better as a care partner. In terms of social needs, again, these are maybe similar to your loved one's needs, but you may have your own specific needs to connect with family and friends. Maybe you like to have coffee with a friend and you really just don't have time to do that, and that's something that would be important to you, to feel some sense of normalcy in your life. Spiritually, it's about finding your place within the role of a care partner, having purpose and meaning, and then really just looking at the whole picture. And that is, you may have lots of other responsibilities besides caring for your partner with Parkinson's disease. And that may involve, you may be looking after grandkids, you may have elderly parents, you have to manage the household. There's lots of other things that factor into the plethora of things that you might have on your plate. So moving on to the second kind of part of the process is just identifying who can help us when we've figured out what the needs are. The next step is okay, how do we address the needs? And as part of overall planning. So I kind of like to look at supports in terms of what I call informal versus more formal supports. And what I mean by that is informal is like the personal, the familiar. So it might be the people who are more closely around you. And it's important. Why is it important to think about who your social supports are? Because though having those kinds of people around us and providing companionship and information and practical help helps us in our role trying to take care of our loved one with Parkinson's disease. It helps us manage our stress, and really, if we can spread out some of our responsibilities and get a bit of assistance by asking a friend or a neighbor or a family member, maybe if you're in the workforce, a coworker, or somebody in the community that you're connected to. It could be your pastor, it could be a community organization that you're connected to. The sky's the limit when it comes to social supports, and it's important to consider, and to know who your people are. So this next slide is really just, again, it's because sometimes when we think about social support, we think of we kind of think about it in this general sense. But what this is designed, this little tool is designed to help figure out who your people are and what type of support do you find helpful. So there's kind of different types of support. So some people, you think of who's in your circle, we go to them when we have a problem. We want somebody to talk to, we trust them, we can, share what's going on. And then for some people, their role more with us in terms of support is just like, somebody to hang out with, somebody to go for coffee with, somebody to go for a walk with, or maybe just somebody who comes in to visit and comes and visits, your partner, and just has a bit of time to share with you. Some people we seek out for information. We ask them about certain things, and that's the kind of support they provide us. And for other people, it's quite practical. It might be, can I get a ride to the store, or can you take me to a doctor's appointment, or could you do a pickup for me? It could be as simple as that. So what this kind of this is designed to do is to help you figure out who your people are and what kind of support they provide. Because when we need support, figuring out who the one to call is probably a bit overwhelming. And so to have that available to us in a way that we don't have to think about it, could be really useful. So this also can be a helpful exercise to go through to figure out, where are the gaps in my support system. So the next kind of thing to think about, so I've talked about the more informal supports, and so now I'm going to shift to talking about formal supports. And so those are kind of what we think of as systems and services, those kinds of things. And so these kinds of supports tend to be where they become systems that are a little bit harder to navigate. So what I've listed here are some of the kind of the types of resources that might be helpful. And again, you're thinking about it as the process of future care planning. So the next bunch of slides are really just looking at each of thing and the kinds of things you might be considering. So for example, if you're needing a little bit of help, your loved one needs help bathing or dressing, or that's where the system of home support comes in. They offer case management, all different types of services like occupational therapy. You might be needing medical equipment. Maybe your loved one needs a mobility aid and you need to get a walker or a cane or maybe a wheelchair, and you need to figure out, okay, where do I find that kind of thing? Does my community have a Red Cross equipment loan cupboard? Inpatient hospital care. So that's kind of a different ball of wax altogether. When you think about if your loved one has to go into hospital, how do I navigate even being within the hospital system? If I have to consider facility care, a facility placement. What does that mean? And then there's respite care. If all caregivers need a break at some time, and it's really important as part of your planning to think about how to build respite into your care plan, because you really don't want to get to the point where you're so exhausted that you really can't provide care anymore, and that you're feeling so stressed about it. So that's just part of the plan. Transportation, and there's all sorts of other resources that sort of fit into that category of home and community care. The next sort of category I've identified is sort of private. So the other set was public. You kind of have within the system, the healthcare system, you have public services and private services. And I bet you a lot of you are having to, either by choice or you necessity, to look at private services because you're not finding the public services in your communities. So you may have hired home support, and you have a housekeeper to come in, meals to be delivered. You may have to pay, like driving Miss Daisy to get a ride into a clinic. You may have contracted counseling services, and there may be other types of specialized supports or services that you have purchased in order to help you in your role as care providers. Huge area looking at financial resources, and some of you may be familiar with these already. Canada Pension Plan, disability benefits, the provincial resource, which is called PWD, disability tax credit. I'm sure many of you know about that. And for some of you, it may be applying for long-term disability. But looking at the financial piece is all part of planning for the future, and being able to access resources, and knowing, where your income support's coming from is really important in terms of looking ahead. So all of the stuff that you were just listening to Joanne talk about is in this category. Rep agreements, power of attorneys. So I heard somebody ask a question about, enduring versus not, versus not enduring power of attorney. What's the difference? Advanced care directives, MAIDs, so that's medically assisted doctor aided death. So I didn't say that right, because the acronym is what's there, but it's basically and that for some people is a controversial subject. But there's a lot of resources out there for people who choose to go that route. And also things like palliative care support. So when your loved one is reaching end stage, and what supports are available for you to help you get through that part of the process. And then the last sort of category I have is kind of community resources and services. So, in each of your community, there may be different types of services. It might be like there's a community center, or there's maybe your community is lucky enough to have like a Parkinson's group that provides services, support groups. Your specific community may have certain things that don't occur in another community, and lots of little communities, rural communities, you kind of work with what you've got. And so just knowing what's out there and what can help you deal with whatever need you've identified. And of course, the Parkinson Society, which is a BC, serves the whole of the province, is a resource for everybody in BC who is connected with Parkinson's. So there's all kinds of information and resources. Just even if you check out the website, it's just a lot of information there. So the next kind of topic I want to address, and you kind of may be wondering why I've put this in here. As I mentioned earlier in the discussion, when I'm working with people and their care partners, and I ask them if they, maybe this whole sort of topic of future care planning is coming up, and so I ask them if they want to talk about it further, and some of them will say, absolutely not. I don't want to. I don't want to think about it, and so that's okay. So I think it's important, but other people do, and they just don't know where to start the conversation. So I think it's important to take a moment and kind of look at what gets in the way of our long-term healthcare planning. And one thing is, it's the thought of it is just so completely overwhelming. Like, where do I start? I don't even, it's very, very daunting for many care partners, that they just don't feel like there's even an extra second in the day to even be thinking along those lines. They're tired. They don't have any energy. They're, just trying to get through the day-to-day care. And they don't feel that they have the knowledge or the information to even begin to navigate in terms of future planning. Another huge factor is just dealing with the unknown. And if you look too far ahead with Parkinson's, because of the nature of the illness, it can bring up a lot of fear, and it's totally understandable that would be a factor for many people. And so what I'm hoping with this talk today is that you'll walk away with a few things, and that the fear and the overwhelm will diminish a little bit, even if it's just a little bit. So the last thing I wanted to just highlight is this sort of whole concept of ambiguous loss and anticipatory grief. Again, there's a really excellent presentation on this, and it's on the Parkinson's website. And it's a really complex topic, so I'm really just going to skim the surface and just highlight a few things. So when we talk about ambiguous loss, it's that sense of, and I'm going to explain how does this factor into what gets in the way of planning. It's that sense that your partner is there, but they're not. And so they may be there physically, or they may be there cognitively, but not able to participate physically as they used to. So with any chronic illness, and Parkinson's is an excellent example, as a care partner, you are experiencing this over a very protracted period of time. And it's tremendously challenging. This type of loss is kind of different from other loss. It's happening kind of in an ongoing way. It changes all the time, and the loss hasn't happened yet. And the loss can involve the loss of the relationship maybe you once had with your loved one, the sense of meaning you derived out of the life you were living, a sense of your own personal identity, because now you're in a care partner role, not just a wife or a mother or a sister or another role. And so it can bring about a shift in identity and a loss of a sense of control over life and what you may have expected life to be. And it's very, very common that this occurs with Parkinson's disease. Anticipatory grief is another piece of the puzzle, and it's that sense of sadness and difficulty we experience on an ongoing basis leading up to something that is going to happen, an imminent loss. And it could be as simple as, well, it's not simple at all, but it could be you're noticing your care partners changing ability to function, they're decreasing function. Or it could really have to do with, you know, that the person is going to die, and that's the progression of the illness. So it's important to know anticipatory grief is a normal response. It's a common response, and that each person may have their own experience of grief. It can be extremely complex because of its very changing, ever-changing nature. And it can get in the way with our ability to function well and to feel like we're on top of it and coping. It can also lead to feelings of hopelessness, a great sense of loss of control, and also increased social isolation. So why is that important? It's important because part of looking ahead into the future and doing our best to address needs and plan for the future is impacted by how we experience today. And we're overwhelmed by our responsibilities. And so it's going to potentially factor into what people's understanding of what the healthcare planning process is. So what can help us with dealing with things that get in the way of planning? So to some degree, and as I mentioned, this particular topic, there's an excellent presentation if you want to learn more about that particular issue of ambiguous loss and anticipatory grief. But to some extent, as much as we're able to tolerate some degree of uncertainty, and for some people that may be easier than others, focusing on what we know, and the more you know, so the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you might feel, and gaining a sense of control over the things that we can control. What helps us deal with this is asking for help, reaching out to whatever resource or service or person, and getting involved in the process of planning with your loved one can help you feel like you're in more control of a situation that's really, really quite challenging. Okay, so let's just take a pause because I'm going to kind of shift on to just really practical tools. So I've been trying to give you some things as we go along, but this is kind of one of my number one things that I really encourage people to do. And I do it myself. I learned it from my 96-year-old mother. She has a notebook that she takes, and she's been doing this for years. She takes this to every appointment healthcare provider that she goes to. She has a notebook, she writes in it, she writes questions for them, she records what they say. Now she just hands it over to them, they write in it. It's keeping track of your health information is really, really important in terms of planning, because if you can remember what you ate for lunch 2 weeks ago, then you've got an impeccable memory. I certainly can't, but so recording information can be a way of helping you to manage it. When you're dealing with healthcare professionals, you're having to become, in some respects, your care partner's best advocate. So tracking, so writing down information, educating them about, you know, what the current situation is, because you will have been paying attention to your care partner's needs, asking lots of questions, and managing the information and the symptoms that the information that may get recommended to you. So that's a team approach. So really just thinking of yourself as an advocate for yourself and for your care partner. So the third thing is really the documents that Joanne was referring to is obviously one of the reasons we provide information about them is because we really want to encourage you to go ahead and get these in place. Make sure you have a will, and it can be a process, and it can again feel overwhelming. Just to chip away at it a bit at a time, have a power of attorney, get a representation agreement, advanced care directives, not just for your care partner, but for you. You may already be in touch with your local health unit. So you may be receiving home support. Maybe you're not, maybe you've hired private services, but even just knowing, being assessed by the case manager or the nurse or whoever comes out from the health unit, you can phone and request an assessment, and it may take, several months for them to get to you. But even getting in their system and knowing what services they can potentially provide is a really good thing to do. It's kind of getting ahead of it and getting those in place before, maybe even before you actually need it. And accessing the services and resources through the Parkinson Society, because there's lots of different things. You may have already accessed counseling, education, which you're all participating in now. There's virtual physio, and their new role that I'm involved with, the healthcare navigator. So that role is really designed to help people navigate through the healthcare system, access resources. So some of those formal systems I was talking about earlier that can be just difficult to get to the right person in the right place. So part of my role is to help people do that. I also help, part of my role is kind of what you'd call a case management role. So helping people set up care plans and developing ways of being able to follow through basically with their own healthcare planning. There's lots of other practical tools, but that's just a few. Okay, so this is kind of my summary slide of the main sort of things I want you to take away. Just to understand, healthcare planning is a process. It's a process that involves assessing need, identifying the resources. So the resource could be a friend or family member, or it could be the health unit or another system in your community, another service organization. It could be the Meals on Wheels in your community. It could be the transportation system in your community. It could be HandyDart. Then accessing the service and asking for help when you need it. Try to get, it's a really tricky one for many people, but asking for help and identifying what you need is just a really excellent skill to develop, and it will help you as you navigate in your role as a care partner. So why do all that? So these are the reasons that you're all here. These are the things that we're looking for. These are the outcomes. So all of you are doing your very best to care for your loved one. And you want to continue to be able to do so. You want to feel less afraid and overwhelmed, because sometimes it can be, you can feel like a deer in headlights. And really, what's your main goal is to do the best you can for yourself and your loved one. By planning, it will help you to experience a sense, kind of two things, a control over what you can control, and a sense of, okay, this is something I can't do anything about. This is beyond my reach. And just being able to balance the two. And of course, the outcome of that is you feel better, you do better, and your quality of life is better. You stay well, and you can continue to be able to care for your person in the way that you want to be able to do, and they want you to be able to do. Okay, last slide. So what do I want you to take away? What do I hope you take away from this? So a bunch of things, but even if you take one thing away, my job is done. When you're thinking about assessing needs, you're assessing your needs and your care partner's needs, not just your care partners. You have to factor yourself into the equation as much as you're able. My little ditty here is, you can't pour from an empty cup. Considering your own needs is equally as important as your loved one. Build your social support network. Think of it as a lifelong endeavor. Build as much as you're able to. And sometimes if you're living in a remote community, that can be challenging. And it's really good to know what kind of person you ask for what type of help, so that if you need a ride, you ask the person who gives you, a practical support, not the person who you usually talk to about what's going on. It may be the same person, but just knowing who helps you and what they help you with. Knowing what resources are available in your community. And the caveat there is sooner rather than later. It's so difficult to come to things when you're in a crisis. And I know I keep repeating myself, but ask for help when and whenever you can. And understand that care planning is a process that is evolving. It's constantly changing as the needs of your loved one changes and as your needs change. It's a process that continues, and think of it as it's not something, if you think of it as a process, it's not, it hopefully at the end of it, you're probably feeling overwhelmed, but hopefully once the day is done, you'll feel less overwhelmed and less daunted by the task. So I just wanted to thank you very much for joining me today. And if you have any comments or questions, I shall endeavor to figure that one out. I don't see chat in here.
So we have a couple of questions through the raised hand function.
Okay.
So I'll do that for you so that they can ask. So we have a question from Jacqueline. Jacqueline, go ahead. You'll have to unmute. Jacqueline, did you? Oh, there we go. You've unmuted. Did you have a question, Jacqueline?
No, I didn't actually.
Oh, okay, because you had raised your hand.
Oh.
I guess it was by accident.
Oh,
Kathy, you've also raised your hand. Did you have a question? If you do and it wasn't an accident, you may go ahead and ask, but you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. This has been awesome. Hello?
Yes. Yeah, you're very welcome.
No, it's been great, but I'm getting on in years too, and I didn't know how to do the webinars, so I got some help with that, and now I'm going to be on all your webinars. So thank you very much. And my husband's right here. He has Parkinson's. He's been watching the whole thing, and he's just raised eyebrows and nodding and everything. So we're both really happy with this. Thank you. That's it.
You're very welcome.
We do have a question in the chat box, Jen.
Okay, let me see.
Second from the bottom.
Oh, elaborate on, so the question is, could you please elaborate on the part when you advise we could reach out to the local health unit even before we actually need it? Okay, so what I often suggest to people is, if you're even thinking about that you might need home support, part of the service they provide you is to come and assess your situation. So what they normally do, and it could be a physical therapist who does that. It could be, and depends on, you know, which health authority you're in. Could be an OT that comes out to do a safety assessment. It could be another person in a case management role. So you can make a request. You can tell them your situation and make a request that, could you please come and do an assessment. You can also request a safety assessment. You can say, my spouse has Parkinson's disease. This is the situation. We want to look at preventing falls. Could you please come out and do, and usually that's an occupational therapist does that, come out and do a safety assessment. So
house is safe.
So it's that's kind of what I meant, is you can make a request if you've had the health unit come in and things have changed. You can ask them to do a reassessment. You can say, look, so much time has passed, things have changed. Could you please come out and do a reassessment? And you may not decide to access services if they deem you eligible, but you get known by the system because they have to create a number, you have a file. And so it's kind of like sticking your foot in the door, and because sometimes we need to access those kinds of services. So that's what I meant by that. I hope that sort of answers your, you have the right to request that kind of service. It may take them a long time to get to you, but you can do it. So unmuting, there's a little thing in the corner, in the left-hand corner, to unmute. Did you figure that out, Joanne?
No, she'll have to use the raise hand function first,
Okay.
and then you'll.
Did you want to ask a question, Joanne? So one thing I didn't talk about was, if you're feeling like you need help navigating the healthcare system, you can contact the Parkinson Society and they will make a referral to the service that I'm involved with. And even if you're not sure whether you need any help, but you need to discuss that, you can phone the Parkinson Society and request that I talk to you about it. So sometimes that helps when we're feeling overwhelmed, just to be able to talk to somebody, and then we can look at, well, what type of help do you actually need? Because you may need some other kind of service.
So I'm having issues with the screen. It's disappeared on me, Jen. So if you can I can't see the chat box anymore.
Okay, I can see it. I don't really see any other questions in here. If there's no further questions, shall we call it a wrap?
I think we can wrap things up then, if there are no more questions. Thank you so much, Jenn, for such an informative presentation. That was very helpful. A lot of good information in there. And thank you everyone for attending, and of course, all of your questions, and we'll see you at our next webinars. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.